Welcome to this EPC Online Policy Dialogue. For this Policy Online Elections Monitor, of course, after the election in Romania yesterday. I am Eric Maurice, a policy analyst here at the EPC, and I will be moderating this discussion. So yesterday, Romanians elected their new president. Nicușor Dan was elected with 54% of the votes. He is a centrist politician and was until now the mayor of Romania's capital, Bucharest. He defeated the other candidate, George Simion, the far-right candidate who had finished first in the first round on the 4th of May. At the time, he had 41% of the vote. He was the favorite for this runoff, but it seems that Nicușor Dan benefited from a strong mobilization from the voters who did not vote in the first round, as turnout yesterday went from 53% in the first round to 65%. So that's an element we will discuss. This presidential election was a rerun after a first election was cancelled by the Constitutional Court at the end of last year. The candidate at the time, who had won the first round in November, Călin Georgescu, had benefited from a campaign on social media that was organized and funded from a foreign country, most likely Russia. That's why the election was cancelled. After last year's crisis, the stakes were high for Romania this time, but also for the EU and for NATO, as Romania has a strategic position bordering Ukraine, Moldova, and the Black Sea. With Nicușor Dan's victory, the EU avoids a new direct challenge, a new political crisis. But with its strong result in both presidential elections, the far right in Romania may not be defeated. The current government is a caretaker government, and one of the first tasks for Dan will be to try to maintain some political stability in Romania. So how does the outcome of yesterday's election affect EU foreign and security policy, and particularly support for Ukraine? What does it mean for Romania's European and transatlantic commitments? What lessons can we draw in Romania and more generally for the EU from the developments we have seen since November when it comes to democracy, the rise of the far right, and foreign interference? We will try to answer these questions with our three speakers today. Veronica Anghel, an assistant professor at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies in Florence. Eliza Vaş, you are coordinator of the studies unit at the European Institute of Romania in Bucharest. And my colleague, Mihai Sebastian from the European Policy Center from the Europe in the World program. Before we start, a word on questions. You, our audience, will be able, and you are welcome to do it, to write your questions in the Q&A space at the bottom of your screen, and we will take them in the second part of this event. So let me start with you, Veronica, and a very simple question. Was Nicușor Dan's victory really a surprise after the result of the first round, and why did he win in the end?
Hi, it's good to be with you today, as we are not evaluating a terrible chaos that would have emerged in Romania. However, I will try to curb my general enthusiasm by also bringing up some of the challenges that remain ahead. It was a surprise to the extent that Nicușor had to bridge a serious gap between him and the far-right anti-democrat candidate Simion, and it was really an effort that Nicușor Dan and his campaign had to put together in the last 2 weeks. And it was also partially a huge loss for George Simion, who ran a disastrous campaign. So Nicușor Dan, I think, won Romania's presidential runoff because he consolidated a broad anti-Simion front that cut across ideological and regional divides. It included urban moderates pro-European liberals and other voters just alarmed by the rise of the far right and its implications. We have to keep in mind that Nicușor Dan is a moderate conservative, and he ran on a very centrist campaign that could catch the attention of multiple voters. His campaign gained late momentum, as I said, as a bulwark against George Simon's illiberal nationalism, conspiracy-laden rhetoric, very aggressive style, absence from debates, and turnout surged, especially in urban areas and in the diaspora, driven to a certain extent by enthusiasm for Dan, but mostly, I would say, because of fear of what a Simion presidency would look like. And now it's really very interesting to see what will happen next. Voters' expectations, I think, are quite layered. Many expect Dan to safeguard Romania's EU and NATO orientation and act as a stabilizing force amid clear institutional fragility. This is not a clear victory. I know that we are looking at this as a great sign of mobilization of the pro-EU vote, but we have to keep in mind that Simion won a sizable portion of those who were present in the vote, and that is over 5 million votes. So this is remarkable also for the far right, and it remains an important question mark what Nicușor Dan will manage to do next to deal with the surge of the far right in the country.
Thanks, Veronica. We will look at the political landscape in a second round of questions, but I first would like to turn to Eliza Vaş and ask the role the EU played in the campaign and in the victory campaign of Nicușor Dan. Was it really a topic for the voters who did turn out yesterday? Did this second round turn around Romania's place and role in the EU, or was it just a by topic amid many other with more domestic focus? Eliza.
Thank you very much for the question addressed. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Just a short disclaimer, our views are my own and do not represent the official position of the institutions I'm affiliated with. To answer your question, I think it's really important to also look at the elections from last year, because I think there was a mismatch that was wrongly attributed to the Romanian voters, meaning that the vote that has been expressed at that time for radical political offers and for ultranationalist political offers was seen as an anti-European vote, which was not the case and was demonstrated during this election. Because if we look at the polls, Romanian support for the EU membership is very high. For instance, a poll that has been conducted in January, February this year states that we have around 80% support for the membership to the European Union. And if we are looking in contrast, for instance, with a potential support or endorsement for a closer relationship with Russia, because this was one of the subjects that have been brought into the debate, the citizen support for a closer relationship is quite low. Some polls say it's around 5%, other goes just under 10%. So the citizens definitely are in favor of not only keeping our membership to the European Union, but also consolidating our membership. And if we are looking at how the political campaigns have been conducted by both the candidates, We could have seen also in the case of George Simion that the messages that were sent in regards to the membership to the European Union have been adjusted in the past months. So it was not about Romanians exiting from the European Union, but rather having a stronger voice in the European Union of better protecting the rights of the Romanians in the European Union. I think that's a considerable change that has been made due to the messages that were coming from the citizens in order to protect our membership to the European Union. At the beginning, it wasn't the membership to the European Union, or let's say the European policy topics that were having the first places on the agenda for the citizens. It was mostly about the domestic ones, and also the vote anti-system, anti-establishment. Afterwards, especially what has happened when comparing the public appearances of the candidates and how they have positioned themselves in relation to both the European Union, to NATO, and to the neighboring countries, the subject of our membership to the European Union definitely gained traction. And we could have seen also in yesterday's exit polls and in the showing of the Romanian citizens that they went on the streets with both the Romanian flags and the European flag. So not at the beginning so much, but in the last part of the political campaign.
And you mentioned the claim to have Romania's voice being better heard in the EU. Does it apply also to individuals? Because what was striking seen from Brussels or Western Europe was the score for Simions in the Romanians living in Germany, France, Italy, Belgium in the first round, but also in the second round yesterday. So do you explain this vote by this desire to be better heard or considered, or was it also mainly for domestic reasons? And Veronica can also answer that question if she.
I think we could consider this vote also by what you are saying, because one of the messages that have been quite active in the past years was that of double standards. There were many messages being propagated in the society, and a sense of injustice that has been made public by different categories. So by appealing to that sense of injustice, by appealing to that sense of double standards, the political message has changed in a way that both the membership to the European Union became something to put at the forefront. And if we are looking at our membership, one must also note the fact that Romania has gained a lot from being a member of the European Union. The way our country looks now in 2025 is way different from how it looked in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. But what has happened, especially in the country, was that the benefits of joining the European Union have not been distributed equally. So there are these inequalities between different regions of Romania that could also explain going to one political option instead of the other one. And maybe this could represent for the new president, because for instance, in his speech after the results became clear, he sent this message: we don't have two Romanias. That, for instance, in the past weeks, the social polarization was at a very high extent, but we have one Romania. So this one Romania should also be built in the next months and years, also by reducing the inequalities that currently exist between the regions.
Veronica, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Eliza made great points. I would only add that We've been ignoring this inequality that exists not only in Romania, which has the highest inequality in the European Union, and there's a clear cleavage between rural and urban areas. In the rural areas, you have youth unemployment at 30%. And across the country as well, you have the highest dropout in school dropout in the European Union, and also the highest level of poverty. Almost a third of the country is at risk of poverty. This is an enormous problem for a country that also has the highest gains from EU membership. And the one thing that I would add is that the divisions that we see in the vote of Romanians voting abroad, so the diaspora, is also across economic divides. We still have to look at the results for these at a section by section, voting station by voting station results for these elections. But in the first round, this was very clear. So you would have the pockets in the center of big cities who would vote in one direction, and those that are in other areas of around the big cities or in rural areas who would vote Simion or far right. And it's a major issue because Romanians abroad are divided as well. And those who have benefited from mobility, who have high education, who have integrated, have one view of Europe, whereas there's this huge group that has been left behind, and with whom these kind of forces speak to through social media, and promise them a country worth returning to, and for their leaving the discrimination with which they are treated in the countries that received them, primarily Italy, Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands.
Thanks. Mihai, I will ask you kind of the same question I asked Eliza, but this time about NATO and support to Ukraine, because of course, Georgescu in the first election was very close to Russia, not wanting to support Ukraine, but also very critical of NATO. Simion, for himself was also critical of the support to Ukraine, but saying that he would do whatever Trump would like to do. So do you have an idea of how the voters decided yesterday on these issues? Did they want to defend Romania's membership to NATO and support to Ukraine as much as they also wanted to support EU membership, or is it more complex than that?
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you for this discussion. I think I'm on a similar line with Eliza. I think there is high support for EU, for NATO in Romania, and automatically also there is support for, of course, supporting Ukraine, because there is a general understanding of what might happen if we don't support Ukraine. An interesting fact here is I think that many of the voters who cast their vote for Simion also sort of understand this, and they want, of course, a Romania in the EU. They want more integration. They want a Romania closer to NATO, and perhaps this is exactly sort of the point where reconciliation needs to start. I think that the first step that Nicușor Dan needs to take is to reconcile these two sort of Romanias that both Eliza and Veronica were talking about, because in the end he got more than 5 million votes. So he needs to be we need to bridge this gap between the two Romanians. And to bridge this gap, I think there are two aspects here. One is, of course, support for the EU, for NATO, for more integration for Romania, support for a strong Romania, because in the end, many of the voters that voted for Simion and for Georgescu in the past, they want a strong Romania, right? They want a good image of Romania abroad, and they also, at the same time, they also want a change in the system, which is also what the voters for Nicușor Dan want. So perhaps this could be sort of the first step step to start for the new president to reconcile. Of course, at the same time, I think it's also important to do something else, to clarify and explain once and for all what happened in the round of elections that were cancelled. I feel there is still sort of a lack of clarity among the Romanian citizens, among some of them, about what exactly happened, what was the role of Russia, how exactly did the interference work, and exactly what happened. Without sort of clarifying this, then again, it would be very difficult sort of to merge the two Romanias that are now. And then, of course, there are many priorities in foreign policy and security policy that I can go into a bit later. But here, of course, is the upcoming aspects, the NATO summit in June, the European Council in June, and then more on a short to medium term, the development of new Romanian strategy for defense of the country, which is extremely relevant in the current security environment.
Thanks, Mihai. Well, you mentioned reconciliation, and of course, Veronica and Eliza touched upon the question of inequalities of the two, whether there are two Romanias or not. So that leads me to ask about what's next politically in Romania, because Nicușor Dan is becoming president, but as I said in the introduction, the government is a caretaker one. The majority in the parliament from elections in November or December last year, so quite recent, is very divided. The government was made of a coalition between the center-right and the center-left. How can this stand? How can the new president work with this majority in the parliament? And also, what can be the role and the influence of the far-right into that? So, Veronica, do you want to answer that first? And Eliza, if you want to add something, and Mihai, of course.
Of course. So what happens now is that the president has the power to nominate the prime minister. Nicușor Dan has already announced his intention to nominate Ilie Bolojan, who is the interim president of Romania after Klaus Iohannis resigned in December. If that happens, then so they would have to agree on it, and that prime minister would require the votes of not only the parties that supported Nicușor Dan, who is an independent, but he was supported by the parties, by the National Liberals, the Save Romania Union, and the Union Democrat Hungarian Union. So those votes would not be enough to secure a majority in parliament, and they would require votes from the Social Democrats, assuming that nobody in the far right part of the parliament would vote for Nicușor Dan's proposals and stay in the opposition. It would require a sizable part of the Social Democrats to support such a government. What we hear in what I've heard from colleagues in Romania is that the Social Democrats are likely to support such a government and will want to negotiate and also participate in governance. That governance will be very challenging. Romania has currently serious budget deficits. It requires important reforms to just float above the let's say the junk level of investment investment grade status, and so it will be very challenging to create a coalition that can also provide some policy solutions along the lines of those we've discussed. So this is what will happen in the immediate future. There will be coalition negotiations, and the idea would be to bring enough of the Social Democrats in support of the new government, but without, let's say, their toxic interference against which Dan also won. So it will be a bit of a balancing act for Dan. He's been quite disarmingly honest through the campaign. He has already said that there is no way to do it without the Social Democrats. And I think that they are trying to avoid early elections, which require a lot of procedural effort to go into, because that might increase the far right in parliament as well. So we will see some kind of coalition arrangement with hopefully a part of the Social Democrats that is not the completely, let's say, toxic and corrupt part that would have probably liked to govern with the far right parties.
Thanks. Eliza, I can ask you the same question, but Veronica was already very detailed. In these discussions, what role can EU policy have? Would they need to agree on that level of, politics, or will it be only domestic? And reversely, these discussions and how they go, how can they affect Romania's position in the EU, but also the role Nicușor Dan would want to play in the European Council? So, shortly, would Romania's EU policy be a victim or a benefactor of the potential evolution of Romanian politics with this new president?
Thank you for the question. It's very interesting because I believe that the vote that has been expressed on yesterday is also a vote for reinforcing our stance in the European Union, and it's also a vote for the center-right and center-left to better position themselves on the European issues. Because if we look down at history, both the center-right and the center-left have been the political pioneers of advancing Romania's agenda towards the European Union, towards the integration in NATO, towards advancing in the Schengen zone. So maybe the vote that has been expressed on yesterday will also represent like a new impetus for repositioning both the center-right and the center-left in the future months. In terms of, let's say, priorities or pressures that are characterizing right now the country, as Veronica rightfully mentioned, we have the economic matters that will definitely represent the first place on the agenda, and dealing with the excessive deficit. But also, at the same time, I think it's really important to deal with the social fragmentation. And it's quite difficult to deal with the social fragmentation if, for instance, the traditional political parties will not be involved in this new reconstruction process of rebuilding the trust of the Romanian citizens in the institutions and in the way democracy works. Because we need to say this, we are a functional democracy. We have the rule of law. The democratic principles are respected, as we have seen with the elections that have been organized, and people could have expressed their vote. But it's definitely a process that will follow both axes of the economic affairs and reducing the social polarization. And one thing, even though maybe it will not be used in the same manner because the conditions have changed, from his term as a mayor of Bucharest and also in the declarations that have been made during this political campaign, Nicușor Dan has said in several times that he hopes to have a government where both the center-right and the center-left are represented. And in his term as a mayor, he managed to work quite well with, especially in the second, now with the second term, the beginning of it, quite well with both parties. So he might have the political experience and the appealing to the political situation in order to try to mediate between the political forces that now have a saying in how the future of Romania will look like.
You mentioned trust in the institutions. We have precisely a question on how can the EU support Dan to strengthen the Romanian people's trust in their system of governance?
That's a very good question, because I think this problem with the trust is not only in the case of Romania, but also in the case of other member states. And what has happened is that going through two crises, the first one being the pandemic, the second one, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, there have been some downfalls in terms of the communication with the citizens, and because of the fact that the communication with the citizens wasn't made quite well, especially in the past months, in the past years, also their level of trust in the institutions has been damaged. So one thing that the national institutions, first of all, could do, and I think the interim president has started to make significant steps in this part, was to communicate with the citizens and to present the situation as it is. And also from the declarations that have been expressed last evening by Nicușor Dan on this matter, is that we know that a difficult period will come, but we are going to try to be prepared for it, even though it will assume some difficulties for Romanians. For the European institutions, what could be done more? I think this is also in terms of the way we are communicating the benefits. For instance, we had last year with the European elections a very good campaign that has been conducted by the European institutions in Romania and in other member states, talking about the benefits of the membership. But as we have seen very well, both in this campaign and in other campaigns, but mostly in this one, it's not always about, the arguments, the rational side. Here's the, let's say, the advantages of being part of a union. Oftentimes, it's also about the emotional side of being part of, let's say, liberty and justice space, of belonging to a community of values, because I'm one of the people that believes that our values of the Romanians are also related to the European values. So maybe what could be done more in the next months and years is to talk about this sense of belonging to the European Union, not only in terms of protection, prosperity, and presence, which is in different spheres, but also in terms of emotions, in terms of values, in terms of principles, and in terms of knowing that we are part of this union because it's benefiting us all beyond, let's say, the economic advantages that it has.
Also related to the EU, and that's a question for the three of you, if you can answer it. We have a question about the impact of the issue of climate change and net zero policies in the campaign and in the motivations of the voters, given that in the European elections last year, that was an issue, apparently. So was this the case for the radical right voters in Romania this time? And also elsewhere, but of course the question is mainly for Romania. So I don't know if you, Eliza, or Veronica, or Mihai has an answer for that.
I can try and take it. Just one point to what the EU can do before what Eliza said. I think that apart from disastrous transparency records and miscommunication from the previous administration, there's also a problem with dealing with misinformation that is running rampant in Romania. For example, Romania is now in the low tier of support for Ukraine. According to polls that we've conducted at European University Institute, and the main driver for that is the misunderstanding that the United States and NATO are to blame for the war in Ukraine, which the Romanian authorities have never dealt with. So, parenthesis closed. The issue on the climate change. I think climate change is a remote issue in Romania. This has not been embraced by either sides in a way that it echoes the kind of conversations that you would have in Western Europe. On the far right side, the climate change is seen in conspiratorial terms, and it is occasionally mentioned, but it's not a main issue. While, let's say, in the centrist moderate part, in Nicușor Dan and others' camp, climate is more about preserving nature, green spaces, maintaining, the healthy environment, and it's not, again, that kind of mobilizing issue that we have seen further in Western societies. Romania does not have a strong, under the umbrella of progressive movements, it does not have such strong progressive movements. Nicușor Dan is not part of that either. We have to keep in mind that he is a moderate. He is against same-sex marriage. He is a member of the church. He's a moderate centrist. But that kind of culture wars that the far right has tried to bring actively in Romania don't have an opposite the direction of resistance.
Thank you. Another political question, sorry, before we move on the security issues, and maybe Mihai, you will be able, because I saw your hand raised, able to address the question of support to Ukraine. But we have a question, I think a question we all have this morning is, how can we compare, or what can we learn from comparing the trends and outcomes in yesterday's elections in Romania, Poland, and Portugal? So in Poland, it was the first round of the presidential election with the Peace Party, the Nationalist Party, getting very close to the center-right candidate who finished first before the second round. And of course, in Portugal, the center-right coalition or party won the election, but the far-right party again made progress in the electorate. So to have common lessons for these three European votes of yesterday, Veronica and then Eliza or Mihai.
Well, I think it's definitely a reminder that there is no space for complacency. The far right is very strong throughout Europe, and there is a cocktail of factors that is strengthening it. We see that the issues tend to be similar across Europe. There are economic concerns that we've already touched upon that are also true for other countries, but there is also a problem of identity politics that has also local flavors. So it's not just about the EU versus, pro-EU versus pro-Russian. It has a lot of local nuances that we see in Poland, where the pro-Russian part is very low, but it is still fed by the misinformation and economic grievances that are being amplified by the far right. So again, the lesson of intervention is a much better communication and responsibility on the side of the political elites that so far doesn't exist. I think that the main lesson here is that the people who have won or have gotten close to winning elections in Portugal and Poland, and who have won a lot of support in Romania as well, have legitimized the radical anti-system discourse and mobilized a disaffected electorate that views liberal governance in itself not as a safeguard but as an imposition. So the lesson is that, well, for so far, the liberal order in a country like Romania has survived, but it's only for now. And it stands on alarmingly fragile ground, which is also represented in these other countries where we see the far of truly nationalist forces.
Eliza, do you have a take on that from an EU perspective also?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I would refer to the sense of discontent and the fact that many of the parties who are trying to capitalize on the sense of discontent are coming with radical offers or extreme right offers in this sense. So maybe one lesson that we could learn from this situation is to look at the political spectrum and to see if this also happens because of the fact that there aren't spaces available to express, let's say, dissatisfaction among the other offers of the political spectrum, be it center-right or center-left.
Thanks. So now I would like to have a discussion on the strategic dimension and security dimension, because of course we mentioned that Romania is a very strategic country, and also that the US administration supported George Simion and before him Georgescu. So in which position does this leave the new president? What does it mean for Romania's place in NATO? There are at least two very important places in Romania, the US base and also a NATO base, which was created after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So what is the landscape here, Mihai? And also the question of the support to Ukraine, as I think it was Veronica saying that the support by the Romanian public opinion is very low in favor of the support to Ukraine.
All right, thank you, Eric. Maybe I can also pick up on a couple of questions that were posed.
You're welcome to. Yeah,
I think sort of the first step is that we've proven that Romania can organize transparent elections without any issues, especially when our partners were closely watching what's happening in Romania. So now we have a good base to build on this, and it's also a first step to rebuild Romania's image and also influence. We've seen also during the campaign some of the declarations of the far right candidate in France, and especially addressed to President Macron. Now, I think sort of that next steps should be, of course, focusing on a couple of directions. One is directions of major European partners, and here I'm talking about, of course, building good relations with France. There's already a very good base to continue on that. Nicușor Dan already seems to have a good working relation with President Macron, but also with other important partners in the EU and outside the EU, such as UK, for instance. I'm also talking about Germany. Then in terms of more sort of strategic directions, I think there will be predictability for Romania when it comes to that. I was mentioning earlier the NATO summit in a little bit more than a month's time. That will be an opportunity for Dan to present Romania's position and commitment, because there are many relevant discussions, including the discussion on defense spending. Romania is currently at about 2.5%, but already discussions are around getting closer to 3.5, and even committing another around 1.5 for other aspects that are related to defense. So there is an opportunity there for Romania to touch upon these issues, to present its position, to also present its position on support for Ukraine, and I think more broadly to discuss about the future of security in the Black Sea region. Now, there was a question on what the EU can do more, and here, if we look from a defense perspectives, I think there is room for the EU to bring more the discussions that take place on defense in Brussels to Bucharest. I feel there is a need sort of to better understand and to better present what the EU is doing in terms of supporting joint procurement, in terms of supporting the development of or enhancing military mobility in Europe, in terms of different funding lines for defense equipment, and in terms of development of capabilities, which takes me, of course, to another important point in the next period, which is the development of this new strategy for the defense of the country, which of course will include major pillars such as the strategic partnership with the US, NATO, but of course it should also include EU's defense initiatives that are very relevant, especially in the process of acquiring and developing new capabilities, and also what I just mentioned earlier in terms of joint procurement, joint acquisition, but also in terms of developing military mobility, which is essential, especially on the eastern flank. Now, you also mentioned, of course, the U.S. administration. I mean, here, of course, the Romania's strategic partnership with the U.S. continues to be very, very strong. I think now we'll also be in a better position to discuss with the U.S. because there will be a coordinated position with the EU, and we've seen also developments over the weekend and different meetings configurations. And the important thing is that Romania is there, and there will be a coordinated position. Now, I think there was also a question, more broadly about Romanian foreign policy approach. And I think there is also room here to consider, of course, more medium, long-term also Romania's presence and relations in a broader global South, Middle East region. Romania already has a history of good relations with different partners from these regions. So there is room to also build on that, which I believe should be a priority, especially when we look at the different, global and regional shifts that are taking place right now. I believe there was also a question on the European Council, and I think decision making there, if I remember correctly.
Yes, there was one. Yeah, because it's Nicușor Dan sitting in the European Council for Romania. So the question was on the risk of having a new far-right leader blocking decisions there, which, of course, will not happen with Dan, but is this risk completely set aside now?
I believe there will be predictability for Romania in the European Council. I wouldn't necessarily say that the risk is fully gone. Of course, the Romanian president represents Romania there, but I think it will also depend on the configuration of the government. But I'm an optimist there, so I'm pretty sure that there will be predictability.
And just one question that came to my mind listening to you. So we know there are discussions, not yet negotiations, but talks about Ukraine, ceasefire or peace. What role could Romania play politically, but also given geography? How could it be used by NATO or the coalition of willing to participate in a post-war settlement, for instance?
Well, I think Romania will play an important part, well, not only in this, but mainly in this will be the maritime dimension in the Black Sea. I think we need to look sort of, more broadly what could happen, in the security of the Black Sea if there is a ceasefire. There are a couple of course, scenarios here, but I think in all of them we know that Russia will still be present in the Black Sea in one way of another. There will still be disruption in the form of hybrid attacks. Here I'm also thinking about this trend of hybrid attacks against critical infrastructure, sea and subsea critical infrastructure. Of course, now there is development of this kind of infrastructure in the Black Sea, but we could easily see a threat here. So I definitely see an important role to play for Romania here as part of course, NATO. On the other hand, it's also important to note that the EU is now developing a new strategy towards the Black Sea, and that there's also opportunity there, and Romania has been very active to assert its positions there. And I think more generally, support for Ukraine, and not only, also for Republic of Moldova, which ceasefire or no ceasefire will continue to be in the crosshairs of different hybrid tactics coming from Russia. So I would say at least these 3-4 dimensions.
Thank you, Mihai. We have 9 minutes left, and I would like to go into the question of lessons to draw from all this series of events, especially about foreign interference and the way to react to it. And I will turn to Veronica, because you wrote quite an interesting article for the IAI think tank in Italy about what you called the illusion of containment. So can you tell us a bit more about your ideas, your conclusions on what happened, and also in the light of yesterday's result, because in a way this foreign interference was defeated by the result, but probably at a cost for democracy as well. So okay. What can you tell us today after the results?
One thing that I've been thinking about that it's important, I believe, to keep in mind is that if we are in this situation today, it's because Romanian institutions pulled a sort of emergency brake on a moving train back in December by annulling the presidential elections. And when you do such a move, referring to the possibility of anti-democratic candidates to take over the country, and so change the constitutional order, and also referring to hate speech that comes with the right of free speech, but hate speech is illegal. So these are laws that many countries have, but tend to ignore. Romania did not. So it was a very active gatekeeping from the institutions. That was it is the reason why Mihai gets to say rightfully there's going to be predictability in Romania, or Eliza can speak about the commitment that Romania has for EU values, and so on. But that was a major lesson that everyone can draw. When you take such decisions, you also risk to delegitimate people's vote. And now that's going to be a long-term problem that Nicușor Dan will face. And it's something that we can see in other countries as well. So gatekeeping works until it fails. So now there's just really a lot of rebuilding of trust in institutions. This would be the first one. The second one is that the economic model of Romania and neoliberal orthodoxy is severely broken, and we need some really creative, but not. There are solutions for this to deal with this enormous inequality that is also materialized in the voting results, and it's just not. This is not something that can resist for 5 years without a solution. The new elites will have to deal with that. And I think that then the third point is a lesson on the role of identity politics that is not as easily put in separate boxes. It's not MAGA versus whatever progressive happy people. It's just it's very much dependent on domestic trends, and we need to take those into account when we want to participate in interventions and policy recommendations.
And Eliza, would you say that Romania was a specific case for this kind of interference and the way it was conducted, or do you see at EU level other countries that could be also targeted, and how do you see the EU being equipped to address this kind of threats in the future? taking into account also the lessons of Romania?
Mhm. Well, I believe that Romania has a lot to learn from the Republic of Moldova. First of all, because as there have been enormous pressures on the Republic of Moldova, and not only in the past year, as for instance seems to have been the case for Romania, but many years before that, I think a better transfer of expertise, because in the past we were always talking about the transfer of expertise, especially in terms of European affairs, from Romania to the Republic of Moldova and to its preparation for accession to the European Union. But in terms of combating hybrid threats and manipulation, I think there's a lot to learn from the Republic of Moldova and also from other countries as well. And as for the lessons, the short lessons that we need to learn, I think it's one related to trust, that you need to build trust as a continuous process, and it's not working just to communicate at the beginning of the mandate very well or at the beginning of the crisis very well, as it happened during the pandemic, and afterwards to not have almost any type of communication. Because what Mihai has previously said with Ukraine, this has also happened due to the fact that the support that has been given to Romania by Romania to Ukraine is very unknown in the country, and of course there's a lot of room for speculation in this sense. And the long-term lesson that I really hope to learn, for us to learn in the future, and maybe we have a better chance in this sense because we have a new president that has a civic background. And it's quite something unusual, we could say, for our politicians. Maybe we could learn the lesson of investing in civic education, of knowing the constitution, of becoming active in the society through volunteer work, because there are many problems that could be dealt with at the grassroots level if the citizens are involved in this process. And if we couple the civic education with media education, maybe there's a chance on the long run for dealing better with disinformation and foreign interference.
Thanks, Eliza. And Mihai, maybe also given the importance of Romania's role that you explained, do you expect Romania to be targeted again, even out of elections campaign, or what kind of threats could be facing Romania now?
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, definitely. I think that there will still be threats, of course, mainly in hybrid disinformation, perhaps any other types of hybrid threats against critical infrastructure, for instance. So I think this trend will not stop just because we finalized an election cycle. So this will still be there, and we need to be prepared for that. Maybe I can just sort of also draw a couple of lessons from the elections, and I think for me the most important one as we look to the future is a lesson of leadership, that we need a president that is an example in terms of leadership. We need a president that is present at the international level. We just came out after more than a year of elections. The country has suffered, of course, economically, but also in terms of international image. So the president really needs to take a leadership role on this. And also because Eliza mentioned the importance of communicating what's being done. I think this is extremely important, communicating, of course, externally, but also internally to the population what is happening, what are the next steps, including the national strategy for defense, Romania's presence at all these summits. And I think what also perhaps could be done is to take more advantage of the expertise of Romanian professionals abroad, because we have an immense pool of expertise in many different areas, and there could be ways to include all these Romanians to help rebuild, our image, to build our influence. I'm not talking about Brussels, but I'm talking more at, of course, at the international level. So for me, it's the lesson of leadership, rebuilding our image abroad, being more active. As you mentioned, Eric, the Black Sea region is extremely relevant. Ukraine is extremely relevant, and they will continue to define the security environment in the years to come.
Before closing, I have a last question. When will Nicușor Dan take office? We didn't mention that. Who knows? Eliza?
First, need to have the constitutional court to validate the elections, and afterwards to prepare for the official, for instance, after the round from last time, it was 4 days after the first round that the constitutional court gathered in order to validate the election. So we could expect a similar term in this sense, but in maximum 2 weeks, we should have instated a new president, as there are some difficult tasks ahead of him. So firstly, the participation to the NATO summit between 24 and 25 June in Hague, and afterwards the participation to the European Council, and also very important, and this could be seen as a test in terms of how the situation will unfold. The president has the prerogative to nominate 3 members of the Constitutional Court, and we have 3 members of the Constitutional Court whose mandates are expiring this year.
Well, very interesting points to finish our discussion. Thank you very much, Eliza Vaş, Veronica Anghel, and Mihai Sebastian. Thanks also to our audience for the questions and for your attention. If you are interested in the elections of yesterday, we have another elections monitor event at 2 p.m. about yesterday's elections in Portugal. And in 2 weeks from now, we will organize one also after the second round of the election in Poland. So if you want, tune in at 2 o'clock on Portugal. And I wish you a very good afternoon and a very good week. Goodbye.